Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I am Shanti Salas, a Vice President at Open Corporates, and welcome to Why Transparent Company Data Should Be on Your Product Roadmap. Chances are you're with us today because your product that you look after needs access to foundational information about companies in order to have the functionality your users need. In this webinar, you'll hear how two industry leaders have used transparent company data to accelerate and enhance their products, and ultimately why transparent company data should be on your product roadmap. So, what are we going to cover in the next 30 minutes? First, we'll look at some of the main uses of company data for product managers. Then we'll look at why the current company data landscape has held back product managers. Finally, we'll look at actual cases of how transparent company data has accelerated product development. And at the end, there will be time for questions and answers. So please type any questions you have in the question box and go to webinar interface. And please respond to the poll question midway through. So with that intro out of the way, let's introduce our speakers. I will first turn it over to Adam.
Thanks, Shanti, and thanks for having me today. Really a pleasure to be here with everyone. I'm Adam Mulliken. I run the product team for Quantifind. In case you aren't familiar with Quantifind, we're a software company that uses machine learning and artificial intelligence to automate compliance processes with a focus on anti-money laundering.
Great. And James, over to you.
Thanks, Shanti, and yeah, great pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invite, Open Corporates. I'm James Fair. I'm the CEO and founder at Neural Alpha. We're a London-based sustainable fintech consultancy. We specialize in developing software and data products, mainly for the financial industry, but we also do a lot of work for NGOs, looking at things like supply chain risks for deforestation and other sustainability risks.
Excellent, thank you, James. So let's get started with a question. It's important to level set what we mean by company data. And this question, what is company data, can tell you more than you might think. So first, by company, what we mean is a legal entity. And it's important to focus on legal entities, especially in a risk and compliance context, because it's legal entities that are afforded unique legal rights. Legal entities are what organizations contract with every day. And this is different from a vague notion of a business that can range from, let's say, a storefront address that may or may not be a concrete legal entity, all the way to a brand, which can be a complex arrangement or conglomerate of legal entities. So this is just a very, very fundamental point to sort of level set and begin with. And I want to turn to James quickly. You've mentioned in previous conversations the issue of precision and why precision is so important when dealing with legal entity data. Could you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So I guess probably a lot of this is informed by the work that we do in the ESG space, which predominantly is investment managers focused on publicly listed companies. And I guess often from a data integration perspective, people become very focused on names and on issuers, but we know that often actually the kind of iceberg of risk is often in the subsidiaries of these groups. A lot of publicly listed companies will often have hundreds or thousands of different, typically private subsidiaries with them. Different types of legal entities, quasi-legal entities, things like branches, this kind of stuff. So yeah, it's often something that we get asked, why is it useful to understand the full legal structure of these companies, to understand the full group? And I guess yeah, unless you're getting to that level of precision around precise legal entities that can be, you know, uniquely disambiguated with identifiers and this kind of stuff, then it's yeah, there's always a risk with your processes. You know, there's a risk that you get the wrong answers, or, you know, in the worst cases, I guess, that you're saying the wrong things, or you're drawing the wrong conclusions, and you're subjecting yourself to you know, litigation risks. So so yeah, I guess company data is kind of, it's a bit of a loaded term, but the legal part is quite key, I think, in our mind. Yeah.
Yeah, great points. I really like the term disambiguation. That really gets to the heart of the issue, and that precision is just necessary and critical to really establish the foundational facts about a legal entity. The things such as date of incorporation, status, officers, directors, registered agent, registered address, and registration number. So let's turn to some of the main uses of legal entity data for product managers. So first, legal entity data is a necessary ingredient for verification and risk profiling. Legal entity data is a necessary component for investigations and analytics. And legal entity data is increasingly important to data management as a foundational reference set for a universe of legal entities. This is increasingly important for organizations with data lakes that numerous products and services can draw upon. But what I would like to do here is really dive a bit deeper into the first two. Going back to Adam, why is legal entity data important, particularly for verification in the risk and compliance context?
Yeah, yeah, you know, you pointed out, you know, my perspective on this, we're coming mainly from the anti-money laundering and anti-financial crimes perspective in general, and verification is really critical. It's kind of step one, whether you're onboarding a new customer, you know, in commercial or corporate banking, or you're just doing due diligence or actually investigating a potential financial crime. That verification piece is really about legitimizing this entity. You know, you've seen a name, you've been given, you know, some customer information or would-be customer information, a name and an address and some other information, and going through and finding, you know, as an investigator and analyst, you know, is there a website for this company? You know, what is the, you know, when I go to Google Street View, like what's there at this address? And then is there a legal entity registration? It puts legitimacy behind this business. And so now I sort of have some semblance that I'm working with, you know, legitimate entity, and perhaps they are who they say they are.
Great. And James, why would a product need a foundational data set of legal entities for an investigation? Jumping into the second sort of big use case.
Yeah, so I guess it depends on the use case, but you know, often a very common kind of umbrella use case for legal entity data, for company data, is kind of due diligence. So, you know, understanding your counterparties, understanding who you're dealing with, who you're invested with, and I guess that's a common thread, whether it's kind of anti-money laundering or KYC or kind of ESG screening. And I guess, you know, often, you know, we know in reality, laws can be quite varied across different jurisdictions, and as a result, so can company structures. You know, they can be very, very informal. You know, in places like Indonesia, where we spend a lot of time looking at company structures, they can be incredibly informal. How these companies are very kind of loosely connected by you know, common brand names, common addresses, but not necessarily formal kind of legal relationships. So, you know, it's only really through being able to bring in data about company.
Oh, I think we lost James there, but he will likely be back. Adam, anything to add here?
Yeah, I can jump in with a little bit of this sort of financial crimes investigation use case. You know, we work in both anti-money laundering and fraud risk mitigation, and it's typically, you know, those investigations are triggered by someone or something flagging a transaction typically as unusual. And that could be in the case of fraud, someone raises their hand and says, this transaction wasn't me, or, you know, this, I don't know where this came from. I got approached by, you know, so-and-so. Or in AML, it's transaction monitoring, is looking at all of a bank's transactions and looks for scenarios that are, you know, match a typology that could be associated with money laundering, dollar amounts totaling a certain amount, cash transactions, geographies that are risky, that sort of thing. So there's something's been flagged, and now the investigator's job is really to answer, is this actually unusual? Is this actually unexpected? Or is it something I might expect? And so what they need to do is build context around the transactions, sort of round out their picture of who are these businesses, who are these people involved, you know, what industries are they and what geographies do they operate, so that they can, you know, be able to answer that question of, is this truly expected or not? And, you know, for us, bringing legal entity registration at scale is sort of, you know, at sort of table stakes, is give them the data they need with a tool to search it efficiently, but how can we automate as much as possible answering that question? How can you get to automation around, is this expected or not? You know, sort of building that profile with machine learning and artificial intelligence and being able to put context around transactions automatically.
And thank you. And James, because you cut out briefly, just wanted to circle back to you. Is there anything that you wanted to add to that?
I guess first of all, just to check that you can actually hear me.
Yes.
Yeah, I seem to lose the audio for a bit as well. No, nothing to add at the moment.
Great. Well, I mean, it's always fascinating when investigators speak of connecting the dots. Oftentimes, a foundational legal entity data set provides many of those dots that they can draw upon, and of course, cross-reference with other data sets, right? And that often is what provides sort of insights. So what is holding product managers back? Let's talk about some common problems with accessing legal entity data at scale to power a product. So first, sourcing the data yourself at scale from around the world is exceptionally difficult due to the fractured nature of the landscape for legal entity data. And second, product managers are held back by data that lacks provenance, that is to say, a clear line of sight into where it comes from and when it was collected, data that is vague or imprecise about whether it's referring to a concrete legal entity or not, and data built around proprietary identifiers. So going back to Adam, as a product manager, can you talk a bit about the challenges with opaque company data in your experience?
Yeah, sure. On the opaque data, you know, I think the point you hit on about the provenance is crucial, because when you're sort of an investigator and you're gonna put together a decision and a supporting narrative behind that decision and then references off of that, there's a lot of sort of policy and practice that says you should really be using credible, verifiable data. And when, you know, some of these vendors build, you know, highly curated data sets that, you know, have lots of humans contributing from lots of first party sources, you know, developing these profiles, you sort of lose that sort of chain of custody of the underlying data and how did this profile come together. Whereas if we can go directly to sort of the authoritative government registry information and sort of link to that, reference that, but still, you know, put on top of it the right sort of analytics that integrate it with everything else, that we've found is really what our users want. And you know, we've had to resist the temptation to build too much curation or black box or sort of layers of processing on top of the underlying data that would obscure sort of the provenance of the data.
Yeah, that's a great point. Really strong and clear provenance creates defensibility, right? For a product that's being used to make risk-based decisions. It just makes those decisions more defensible. And going back to sort of the fractured data landscape, I think that, when we talk to product managers, speed is of the essence, right? Time is of the essence, time and delays are not your friend. Adam, could you talk a bit about that in terms of sort of proving the value of a solution?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think as a product manager, every day we're thinking about how do I bring capability to market as fast as possible, especially being an upstart, you want to sort of prove yourself as fast as you can, test your product market fit as fast as you can, iterate on a product. And, in the case of legal entity registrations, you can't really have a capability or a feature there around legal entity search or data integrated if you've just got one jurisdiction or two jurisdictions. You kind of need them all. And this is actually how we met Open Corporates way back when. Was we learned that these data sets were very important to investigators. They would in their browser bookmark every single U.S. Secretary of State search website, and and we thought about, well, we could go to each one and negotiate a data sharing, or maybe there's a place you can pull it down, but all of them were different. There was too many, and and I kind of just said to myself, there's got to be someone who's been tackling this hard problem and putting all the data together. And that having one central place to pull the data from in a very sort of standardized, normalized sort of way allows us to bring that capability into our product faster and bring it to market faster ultimately.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I don't think product managers want to be also dealing with sort of multiple licensing agreements that come with sort of going to each and every source, right? A product manager, wants to build a product and build it as fast and efficiently as possible. And, dealing with just licensing agreements and all the sort of terms and conditions layered on top of each other, I'm sure that can turn into a nightmare fast.
I mean, maybe just to add to that, I mean, I would even go as far as saying that, even dealing with one data vendor when it comes to licensing and, getting into conversations around derived data and redistributed data and what constitutes raw data and this kind of stuff can be a nightmare, especially with, traditional financial data vendors. So, I think having a product that you can use that follows more kind of open data principles around licensing is, a massive plus point in my view.
Yeah, for sure. I mean that really speaks to the value of having an open, non-proprietary, unique identifier for each legal entity, right? I mean, it allows one to sort of mix and match and remix with other data sets much more seamlessly than could be done with, let's say, proprietary identifiers. So let's jump from here into our poll question. Do you know where the company data your product uses comes from? So the first one, yes, I can prove where each company record comes from. Kind of. I think I know, but I can't prove it for each record. No, I really don't know where the data comes from. Not sure, or I don't care where the data comes from. So that is in progress. Everyone should see that on their screen.
There's certainly a couple of perspectives here, both the product manager and the user of the product. The product manager ought to know where they got the data from, but might not know, sort of like we said, when you're licensing a very curated data source, I don't actually know what that vendor's sources were. And then from the users of the products, they also might be able to see exactly, have that chain of custody right there in the whatever platform they are using, or they might have that information totally obscured from them.
Yeah, that's a great point. Okay, so poll results. This is interesting. So 30% said yes, and I can prove where each company record comes from. That's fantastic. 60% said kind of. I think I know, but I can't prove it for each record. And 10%, no, I really don't know where the data comes from. So that's interesting, right? You know, the sort of kind of middle ground. You know, I think it shows that there is a recognition for you know, the importance of provenance, and that's why we asked this question. It really speaks to the importance of data provenance and having that clear line of sight and really audit trail around legal entity data on a record by record basis. And it of course makes a product that relies on legal entity data more defensible. So let's now transition into a few other ways transparent company data helps product managers. So I think we've already talked about the importance of company data built around a precise model of legal entities as opposed to sort of a vague model of a business. And we've also spoken just now about the importance of provenance. But there are a few others here. And one is global access in one place. We touched on this briefly, and you know, I'll turn to James. In your experience, how important has it been having all of your official legal entity data in one place, and especially with the work that you've done with import-export data?
Yeah, I mean, really for us, it's you know, really one of the core strengths why we so heavily lean on open corporate. So we do a lot of work trying to disambiguate and match company names from trade data, particularly for soft commodities like soy and palm oil, beef, essentially any commodity that's linked to deforestation risk in different parts of the world. And because it's, you know, it's fundamentally global in nature, these commodities are being imported and exported into every country around the world. You need a global data set in terms of span. So yeah, I mean, in terms of, I mean, I'm continually in awe, to be honest, at the what the open corporates team have achieved, because even, you know, the experience of or the theoretical experience, I should probably say, of scraping one company register is enough to put most people off, I think, let alone you know, trying to scale that across dozens or hundreds of different company registers. And I guess the other big benefit of this global coverage as well, which isn't really something that people talk about enough, is you know, the added value of conforming all of this data to a common model, and, you know, understanding the different nuances around, you know, different registration identifiers and different legal concepts in different legal jurisdictions. Because, you know, ultimately most end users, you know, as Adam was pointing to earlier, that, you know, want to spin up an MVP of a product as quickly as possible. You know, they just want all of this complexity simplified into one, you know, nice and easy to manage data package. So yeah, I mean, it's really fantastic to see.
Maybe I can jump in there too, Shanti. I certainly agree with what James is saying. You know, Open Corporates has done something great here, putting all of these corporate registries in one place and allowing, you know, folks like us to license that data directly from, you know, one place. But for us, it's still not the be all end all. We still need more data to satisfy sort of our investigative requirements. And so having access to the bulk data is really critical, because I'm trying to build a federated search capability that's efficient. And like, as a product manager, there's a whole, you know, deep technical engineering aspect of this to how do I efficiently search 200 million companies and find accurate results and deliver that in milliseconds back to my user, and you know, with all the machine learning and analytics in between that map relationships and do the type of entity resolution that James was talking about. So having that bulk data option enables us to build the right engineering and apply our own matching algorithms, and also the graphing, you know, and building, you know, more and more in AML and other use cases. People are thinking about connections and networks and associations, and only by sort of seeing all the data at once can you start to build out those maps. So yet, sort of yet another reason why the bulk data is really important for us.
I guess just to add to Adam's point, he briefly touched on matching, and I think that's something which people often overlook is having the bulk data in one place is really valuable from our experience. Partly from the perspective of being able to prototype quite rapidly different types of algorithms for matching and disambiguating input companies. It's really hard to do that kind of stuff if you're just piecemeal grabbing records from an API. And I'd say even in an area as niche as commodity trading, there are many different matching algorithms that we use, for different commodities, different countries.
Yeah, great points there. I mean, how bulk data, it really sort of provides a product manager with a level of flexibility where only their creativity is the limit. So from here, I wanted to get a bit more concrete and permit you to talk about some examples, really, and really how transparent data has helped your products in particular. So Adam, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Shanti, and thanks for giving me the opportunity here. Before we're looking at our web application called Graphite Search here. Before I jump into this, I'll just say that much of the value that we deliver is through automation and APIs and the analytics that we do on top of the data and using graph technology and the entity resolution. But APIs and that sort of thing are not very exciting for a demonstration. So I always revert to showing the web application, which still, many investigators around the world are using this to just run searches on demand. When they develop a new name, something pops up at that moment and they want to just run a search. It's easiest to kind of key in the name here. So in this web application, like I said, it's a federated search for either a person or a company. We're running across many data sources that we've licensed, partnered with, and brought in directly. If someone enters the name of a person, we actually look across the officers in all the global legal entity registration we license from Open Corporates. And then if someone searches on a company, and if we just click search here, we'll be looking for Quantified Inc. across all of the legal entity registration. So you can see, first off, you get all the different results from all the different sources Quantified has access to. The right-hand panel is giving the user ways to interact with the data, because as we've brought this data in the moment, on the fly, assess the likelihood it's a true match for the name that I've searched, as well as what risk is indicated. So here we're just focusing on the Open Corporates data. So if we click on from that data sources panel, the company registration, we get right to this sort of profile for a Quantified Inc. So that in this case, we return just one strong confidence result that we're 90% sure is in fact the same company we're looking for. It's actually registered in California, which is the search state that I input. The name is a very unique name. And then here, the user very quickly has immediately gotten to what exactly is on the corporate registry there. So this is sort of the small form, and then we were just looking at the expanded form. The user could also click into that business connections and associates tab, where we've made a special place for exploring the various company data. I'll also mention, by the way, here as an aside, a lot of talk this week about Pandora papers. Another data set that we bring in as a complement to Open Corporates is the slightly less credible and authoritative, but still legal entity registration information that's leaked through ICIJ. And certainly looking forward to bring in the Pandora papers. In this case, Quantified doesn't have any results in the ICIJ Panama Papers, Paradise Papers leak, so we don't see it here. We do see that Quantified Inc. here amongst the list of strong confidence results from Open Corporates. If we expand on that, this is sort of a exploring a graph in a Windows Explorer nested directories sort of interaction or user experience here. So I've taken Open Quantified, the company profile from California. I've expanded it here once. I see the officer, Ari Tuckman. He happens to be our CEO and one of the co-founders from when we were founded 12 years ago. Quantified Inc. is a connected legal entity formed in Delaware. So when you expand on that one, we can go out one further degree and see not only sort of the agent that we use to register the Delaware corporation, but we can see these other legal entities that that Delaware corporation is also connected to in other jurisdictions where we've had offices before. From here, investigators are, annotating this data, enriching it with adverse media or just media in general, other sort of entity lists, and then finally formulating a summary report. And the whole idea is to do this as quickly and efficiently as possible, providing only the most accurate and relevant information and get all the noise out of the way. And that's why, we're taking all of this bulk data, building the federated search, and then adding all the machine learning on top to quickly get to accurate results here. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to show that. Thank you.
Great, yeah, that's fantastic, and it's really great to see sort of, an application that is just crystal clear about provenance, for these records. James, would you like to talk a bit about yours?
Great, thanks Shanti. So yeah, trace finance is kind of quite a different area, I guess, to anti-money laundering, KYC compliance, but with some interesting parallels. So trace finance is a joint venture project between Neural Alpha and the Stockholm Environment Institute and Global Canopy, who are both kind of world-leading research organizations, NGOs, specializing in deforestation and climate issues. And I guess essentially we spun up as a project to address the problem which exists in the world of finance, and I guess that's public finance, but also private finance. That there is a lot of deforestation that is embedded in different financial products around the world. So, pensions, ISAs, savings accounts, you name it. There's often embedded deforestation originating from investments in companies trading palm oil, beef, soy, other forest risk commodities. And I guess historically there's been this real challenge of connecting the dollars of investment capital to the consequences in far off parts of the world. So countries like, for instance, Brazil being a real hotspot for particularly beef and soy deforestation, and then countries like Indonesia for other commodities like palm oil. So essentially our modeling work is all built on top of trade data, so imports and exports of these commodities around the world. And we have a geospatial model that kind of underpins and is able to compute deforestation risk in hectares linked to particular companies. So this is a brief kind of illustration of some of the functionality that we have around search. So we spend a lot of time disambiguating trader names back to legal entities. And this is an example of kind of one of the entry points into the system, which particularly banks lean on quite heavily. So when they're doing kind of ESG due diligence on companies that are prospective borrowers for loans, or in the case of investment banks, counterparties that are looking to raise capital through IPOs, bond issuances, this kind of stuff. So these screens are used quite heavily. And I guess with open corporates, one of the big things that it enables us to do is essentially put together these types of structures. So this is a legal entity hierarchy, kind of illustrating the ownership and control of a commodity trader from a kind of majority ownership perspective. I guess it's often a pattern that we see is you have often large publicly listed commodity traders with many different private company subsidiaries scattered around the world. And then with this visualization, we're actually kind of resizing the nodes based off the actual deforestation risk footprint that they have. So it's quite a conventional one showed there. This is a more complex one. So we often see these types of structures in places like Indonesia, where there's much more informal connections between companies. So generally companies that are connected based off common directors or even directors that are related to other directors of companies. And if you move on to the next slide. So essentially what this enables us to do is things like portfolio screening. So this is an example of a heat map for looking at a portfolio. And then maybe just moving on to the final slide, conscious of time. And yeah, in essence, this is, I guess, what it's all about, is bringing all this data together to connect the dots and be able to link, dollars or pounds, I should probably say, invested in London to, on the ground impacts in places like Brazil, which we just wouldn't be able to do without people like Open Corporates. So,
great to see those practical examples. Transparent company data for sort of kind of know your customer use cases, as well as, environmental, social governance issues like deforestation risk. Especially now that there's increasing attention on ESG issues from regulators, shareholders, and other stakeholders. So for Adam and James, for our listeners, if you had any recommendations for those looking to build tools that use company data or enhance existing products, what advice would you offer?
I can start here. I've got a couple. Certainly, assuming the product manager as the audience here, the thing we've been hammering on is, okay, one single source, I can get all of this data. I think that's pretty obvious at this point. I think the other thing we've hit on too is, assume your users want good provenance, credibility, and traceability back to the source documents. And when you're sort of choosing the data that you're integrate, and even how you're going to process it, how you're going to integrate it, how you're going to, allow them to access it to it, that sort of chain of custody where the data came from, originated, is there still. And the other thing I think I mentioned along the way here is, the world is moving towards graphs and networks and associations, and James just showed us some of the nice ones that they're building in the Trace Finance product. Assume that from the beginning, and that certainly impacts the data that you're looking for, how you store that data, what sort of database technology you want to use, how you want to set up, sort of the back-end architecture, and then just fundamentally what data is. Just assume you're going to be building associations and relationships, and that your users are going to care about those things.
Great. James, how about you?
I'll be quick, being conscious of time. But I guess I think my advice would be, don't be fooled by the salespeople of certain vendors. This is not easy to work with corporate data. I think even when you have a really, really comprehensive product, you're generally blending that data with other data sets. So I would kind of urge caution before rushing to try and do this stuff yourself, because it's it really is a complex and thankless task, kind of cleaning up and standardizing and integrating this data from different sources. So definitely I would hopefully it's not too a shameless plug, but wholeheartedly recommend the kinds of products and services that people like Open Corporates provide. I mean, it's just been a real game changer in terms of agility for people like us.
Great, excellent. And we're pushing close on time, but we do have a question. We do have time for one question, and it looks like this is directed to Open Corporates. And it's real. How do you deal with the fact that data provided from company registries is all different? And yeah, I mean, it's a question we often get, right? It's not an easy process because each registry is different. Each registry does have different sort of levels of sophistication, and this is a challenge that we deal with so that our end users do not have to deal with. I will say that some data is provided from registries even today on CDs, right? On a periodic cadence, they'll provide it in kind of a physical format of a CD or DVD. So you can only imagine that's the level that plenty of registries are still at. So with that, I want to thank our listeners for attending. I want to thank our guest speakers, Adam and James, for joining us today. To help you accelerate your product development. We're more than happy to offer a free trial of our API or a sample file of our bulk data as open corporate. So please let me know if you're interested. My email address is here. Drop me a line. And similarly, if you have any questions, other than that, please feel free to drop me a line on the same email address. And with that, thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, Shanti.
Thank you.